In the last video, what we looked at was ways of making our data safe before we uploaded it and edited it. And I kept telling you that there was a better way to do that than using the quote method of our database object, when we're using PDO that is, and that is using prepared statements. So I thought I'd do a quick video to explain how to convert the code that we've got to use prepared statements. So first of all, a quick overview of prepared statements. What do we need to do to use prepared statements? Well, firstly, we replace the embedded variables in our SQL with placeholders. And just to be complete, there are two sorts of placeholders. There are placeholders called positional placeholders, which I won't cover, and there are placeholders called named placeholders, which is what I'll use because I just find them easier and more straightforward and less prone for me making mistakes. If you want to find out about positional placeholders, you can look that up yourself. So we'll replace the embedded variables in our SQL with named placeholders, and then we prepare the SQL statement. Then we can bind the values of our variables to those named placeholders, and then we can execute the statement. Now it so happens that statements 3 and 4, in steps 3 and 4, we can actually combine into one, which is what I tend to do. Okay, so let's go through our steps. Well, display student wasn't using any variables at all. It was just listing the data that we wanted, and it was, if you remember, making a link to our edit form, passing the student code. So let's look at our edit form. Well, our edit form, what that does is retrieve the data from the request stream. Why does it do that? Here. Retrieves the data from the request stream. We check it's not empty, we connect to our database, and then this is what we did previously. We quoted our student code with the variable in order to make it a bit safer, and then we embedded that variable in the middle of our SQL string. So what we'll do is we'll change that. We won't quote it, because that happens internally when we prepare the statement, and we'll replace the variable with a placeholder. And the way you make a placeholder is you just put colon and a word. Now it makes sense to me that that word be the same as our variable so as not to get confused. And then we're not going to do a query. What we'll do is first of all prepare this statement. So where we've got query, we can just change that for the word prepare. And what that does is take that SQL and prepare it ready for us to bind a value to that placeholder. And in order to bind a value to the placeholder, all we need to do, and I'm going to bind it and execute it all in one step. I'm going to invoke the method of my statement object, so statement student, and the method I'm going to invoke is the execute method. And the parameter the execute method wants is an array of the named placeholders as an associative array linked to the values for each of those named placeholders. So what does that mean? Translated, that means that I create a new array. I'll just put my semicolon in so I don't make a mistake. I create my new array. I make an index or a key of my named placeholder, in this case student code, and then I give that or associate that key with the value that is going to be linked to it, in this case student code. Just make a gap there. So what that line of code does then is take my statement object, it calls the execute method, and it passes as an argument to that execute method an associative array. So I'm creating a new array. The index is the named placeholder that I've set up here, and I'm linking to that named placeholder. I'm assigning to that index rather in my array that particular value. Okay. So from then on, it just behaves as normal. I can fetch the object back exactly as I did previously. Okay, so what that will do is populate that form. So let's just see that in action. This is my display form. I click and it will pass to edit form, and the edit form has just displayed data exactly as it did before. In other words, I've not introduced any error, which is easy to do when you're typing code. So what's that going to do? It's got the form action of edit student, and edit student is going to process all of this information. So let's make a couple of changes here. In actual fact, let's change method get to method post, because that's going to be more secure, or it will stop the data being cached by the web server, and it'll stop it appearing in the logs. So I'll just save that, and we're calling edit student. So in edit student, because I'm now using post not get, I need to change these. Okay, so the next stage is that I don't need to quote these variables. What I'm going to do instead is make up a prepared statement by changing the embedded variables in my SQL to named placeholders. So I'll remove that part of the code, and here where I've got my embedded variables, I'll change them into named placeholders, which I do simply by prefixing any simple word with a colon. I'll just double click on that to make that full screen so we can see that a bit better. So I've made those into named placeholders. So the next thing I need to do is to prepare the statement. Now, in preparing the statement, it's possible that there might be an error. So because there might be an error, I'm going to do it inside this try construct instead. So it's going to end up giving me back, when you prepare a statement, it gives you back a statement object. So I'm making a variable called statement update, and I'm now going to invoke the prepare method of the database object. And what am I preparing? Well, I'm preparing my SQL. The next thing I've got to do is to bind the values that I have here in variables to the named placeholders. Now, as you saw in the previous example, what I did was I created an array and executed it all the same time. But here I've got an array of only one component. So I think what I'm going to do in this version is a slight variation on that, where I'm going to make up a variable to hold multiple values to bind, just because I think it might be easier for you to see. So I'm going to create a variable called bindings and set it equal to an array. And this array, I'm going to create my named placeholders. So what am I binding? Well, I've got something called surname, and I'm going to bind that to the variable that I've got that is surname. I've got something called forename, and I'm going to bind that to my variable called forename, etc, etc, etc. So I'm binding each of the things in my SQL statement to the variables that I got from the request stream. And that's the last of my list of variables, so I don't need a comma as I did with these ones. Occasionally I find it a bit easier to read if I align those, just to make it more obvious to me that what I'm doing is that's the index in this associative array, the index being the named placeholder, and I'm assigning to it or linking to it, depending on how you want to think about the way associative arrays work. I'm linking to it this variable value. So the next thing I need to do is to simply execute the statement passing in this array. Okay, so I'm not going to do a query as I did previously. Instead, what I'm going to do is just simply invoke that statement object. What did I call it? Statement update. And I'm going to executed, passing in my array of the binding. I should have called that plural. No, singular is good. Binding. So if I save that, and we'll just check I've not made a mistake. So Alençon, and we'll change him to 2014. Save student. I didn't choose a student to edit. So what caused that error? I mean, that's just me making a mistake, but student code was empty. That would, if it was empty, it would say you didn't choose a student to edit. So why would that have been empty? What have I done wrong? I've said post student. I know what I did wrong. I didn't reload this. So because I didn't reload it, look, this is still using method get. Whereas I changed it to method post. So I need to reload that form. When I reload that form, it now says method post. So everything will work okay. Again, useful lesson to learn. If your form says get, there's nothing in the post array. It's in the get array and it's in the request array. If your form says method post, then here it's in the post array or the request array, which is actually why most of the time I don't use get or post. I use request because it saves me from making daft mistakes like that. Although that wasn't really a programming mistake, it was just me forgetting to reload the form. So let's do that again. Alençon 2014, click OK, record saved, go back, and we've got Alençon 2014. So everything worked exactly as it did before. It's just that our code now is a bit more robust with regard to SQL injection attacks. Hopefully that made some sense to you, and you can pause and rewind it until it makes more sense. Thanks again. Cheerio.